What's up? Welcome back to Make It Stick. We're going to jump into Anki to start with. We've got 9 flashcards, huh? What is the main point of Chapter 6, Get Beyond Learning Styles, about one sentence? Basically, it's about the myth of the traditional view of learning styles and the learning style theories, as well as 6 learning differences / cognitive differences that do matter. All right, good. What are the 6 learning differences that matter that were discussed in Chapter 6, Get Beyond Learning Styles? The degree to which one takes responsibility for his own learning, the degree of structure building, the degree of rule learning, how one sees oneself and one's beliefs about oneself and one's beliefs about one's abilities and abilities in general, reading and language skills and fluency, and intelligence. Good. What is structure building? Structure building is essentially distilling down a concept, experience, or subject into its main points or patterns, and then connecting these main points or patterns meaningfully, finding the connection between them. What is successful intelligence? Successful intelligence is kind of the idea that the environment in which we develop in and find ourselves in shapes the intelligences that are most important for us based on what's rewarded and what leads to, rewards, but also survival in a general sense. Cool. What are the 8 sections of Chapter 3? Mix up your practice. The myth of mass practice, spaced practice, interleaved practice, varied practice, developing discrimination skills, improving complex mastery for medical students. These principles are broadly applicable to takeaway. Nice. What is dynamic testing? Dynamic testing is essentially the act of taking an exam or doing a test, discovering one's weaknesses from the test, working to learn and improve on those weaknesses, and then taking the test again. What is rule learning? Rule learning is essentially in problem solving. It's learning the underlying rules or principles or patterns across a set of problems within a given problem type, rather than memorizing examples, which is example learning. Good. What are the 3 aspects of intelligence according to Sternberger? 3 different types of intelligence, maybe. Creative intelligence, analytical intelligence, practical intelligence. All right, good. What are the 7 sections of Chapter 7? Increase your abilities. Neuroplasticity is IQ mutable, brain training, memory cues. The takeaway. We're missing 2. Deliberate practice and growth mindset. Okay. What are the 7 sections in Chapter 7? Increase your abilities. A little bit of mass practice for you right here. Neuroplasticity is IQ mutable. Brain training, growth mindset, deliberate practice, memory cues, the takeaway. All right, so what did we learn about yesterday and make it stick? Well, we started reading Chapter 7, Increase Your Abilities. We read the introduction. This is about mnemonics and the whole chapter so far, it seems to be about increasing intelligence, neuroplasticity, and tactics and tips, strategies for increasing your raw horsepower or cognitive horsepower given your current brain and intelligence. So getting the most out of your brain without increasing your intelligence, as well as ways to increase your intelligence if that's possible, which I believe it is. So I'm sure we'll learn more about that in the chapter. This intro was about memory athletes and mnemonics. It's about IQ. The author is saying that the idea that IQ is hardwired into the brain and it's fixed from birth is something we do not believe anymore. That's an old myth. We talked about the marshmallow study, and the marshmallow study, I'm not going to go into it too much. We already went through it yesterday, but largely the authors use this as a way to be like, look, behavior and learned behaviors, I think is what they're trying to say, not behavior, learned behavior, because we know there's evolutionary and genetic components to behavior. Learned behavior is just as important, maybe a little less or maybe more so, for actual learning outcomes, success in the world, learning, as your genes. Your genes give you the potential, but your experience and development help it reach that potential. Using the early United States and all the potential had in natural resources and land as the potential, analogous to the potential of a young brain, which has so much potential of what it could become and what it could learn and all the underlying things it needs to do so. But building the structures and the infrastructure, like in the United States, the roads and the farms and the cities and the ports and the railroads and whatever else, that is like learning the mental models that will help you reach or manifest some of that, materialize some of that potential into actionable knowledge and skills. All right, I think that's basically everything. Let's go ahead and check. Oh, that was the whole intro section. So we're going to be starting today neuroplasticity section. Did we get everything though? Is there anything I'm missing? Early brain development metaphor, early nation metaphor, genes, potential, mental models, country infrastructure, good. Yep, brain's not hardwired, intelligence is not fixed. Cool. Okay, so now we're going to read the section about neuroplasticity. So I'll be back in a little bit. All right, this section on neuroplasticity, I didn't finish it, but it started off with a bunch of stuff about neuroscience and neurodevelopment that I didn't necessarily agree with. This book was published in 2014, and I did take Neuro 1 and Neuro 2 in 2024. 2024 and 2025, so literally 10 years later, we've learned a lot more. So they were kind of talking about, hypotheses that I don't really agree with, saying, when you're born, slightly after, you have this, I can't remember the phase of neuroplasticity, what it was called, but our neurodevelopment, it's where basically there's a growth of a ton of synapses, an overproduction of them. And so a lot of learning, from my understanding, like learning to walk, is a lot of actually pruning synaptic connections, not adding new connections. So the brain overconnects early in life, and then it undergoes synaptic pruning for the rest of its life, becoming more efficient. The authors, I don't think, understand pruning, or the overgrowth being a feature, probably of a safety feature of evolution. I think they said synaptic pruning started when you hit puberty. Not so. I think it starts earlier. And they're like, we learn most of our complex stuff when we have little to no synaptic change, and they're referring to after pruning. I don't think so. I think when we learn new stuff, we are physically changing the brain, and that can include adding new synaptic connections. We now know that synaptic connections form and are pruned all the time. We studied some psilocybin studies in neuroscience about massive synaptic growth after psilocybin, quickly after, talking within like a week. So yeah, I don't think they understand that too much. They throw around some terms that, basic neuroscience terms: axon, dendrite, cell body, gray matter, white matter. Dendrite, did I say that? Yeah. Yeah, they kind of said that the gross brain structure, pretty much your brain in general, is largely determined by genetics, and that the connections in the neural circuits and the different types of synaptic connections are really more based on experience and learning throughout your life. And I agree, but I also would put a huge caveat and say that the synaptic growth and connections, you're largely talking about things in the synapse or in the cortex. You probably don't change much below the cortex. You don't want, your automatic breathing and blinking and heart rate and these why am I blanking on the term for the automatic, like, nervous system? I haven't thought about this stuff in a long time. The terms, that is. Autonomous, somatic, somatosensory, no. Somatic? No. I don't remember. You don't want to mess with those things. You don't want to be like, I learned how to add 2 + 2, so now my heart rate stopped pumping, like, automatically. Like, no. You want to change, like, how you interpret things, sure. How you see the world, your worldview, sure. What you can do and know with, like, your hands and your articulate your thoughts. Yeah, that's all plastic. Deeper brain stuff, probably not so much. They didn't add that caveat. I'm adding a caveat. Then we talked about Paul Bocchi-Rita, which we studied as well. Engineer, probably neuroscientist as well, and engineer who developed these, like, different ways to regain certain senses. The one we learned about in Neuro 1, I believe, was this woman who had messed up. She had, like, an infection, and it really messed up her vestibular, her balance system in her inner ear. And Paul Bocchi-Rita developed a helmet that had, like, levels in it, and then it led to this piece of tape that she stuck on her tongue with electrodes, and when she moved her head around, this woman, it would shock different parts of her tongue, and eventually she began to develop more and more balance back when she couldn't even walk or stand without the helmet. Eventually she could take it off for an hour, and then she could take it off for a couple hours, then eventually she could take it off for a day and just put it on at night, or, like, a couple hours before she went to bed, and that was enough to keep her vestibular system in tune. And this is kind of pointing to the neuroplasticity of those circuits are finding new connections. This time something to do with the tongue location, probably that might be in the somatosensory cortex. All right. Okay. He developed something similar where a blind man had a camera attached probably on a helmet, and he had the electrodes on the tongue, and he could start to learn to see things. It's not the eyes that see things, it's the eyes just collect information. It's the brain that sees things. So he was able to do some basic, like, sight things without eyes, really. He was able to interpret things coming towards him, play certain games, etc. And then they talked about building simulators for the chest of pilots, like on a vest that would give them different somatosensory. Why do I keep saying somatosensory? Different. Maybe that's the case in this again. Somatosensory, like touch and balance system sensory information that they wouldn't get from the plane, so they could receive that. God, gosh, from the flight, the plane's instruments into the vest, and then they could, from the vest, feel it. Okay. Anyway, yeah, we're talking about neuroplasticity. The brain rewires itself. It's not fixed. It changes with experience. We know all this stuff now. Okay, let's make sure I got everything. All right, that's all for right now. I will talk to you guys later. See ya.